What up, gang, gang? What's up? What up, y'all? All right, let's go. Today we're covering Possessor and Infinity Pool by Brandon Cronenberg, the two films. So let's get it popping here because these are two wow, these are wild, y'all. These are two wild films. And this one's going to be, I always say this one's going to be a little different. Well, this one is going to be a little different because these are pure, film streams. We are going to tie in some literature that we've read, with the films, but thought this would be interesting because Infinity Pool just came out, Brandon Cronenberg's new movie, and I thought it'd be good to cover because I saw Possessor in 2020 in the cinema. My homeboy rented out the movie theater, and I went and saw it, not knowing at all what I was walking into. And I immediately walked into the most luminate confirmed movie I think I've ever seen. And Infinity Pool also does not, let down in that sense. So, we've covered some movies here. Usually we cover films that are based in literature, not necessarily based films, but we cover films based in literature. And one thing that I think is interesting is that we always cover one of the whole points of the channel is to cover literature that that pops up. Like when you read books, especially when you read a lot, you see that references pop up all the time in terms of popular culture, the media, um, and just in general in the zeitgeist, I suppose you would call it. And so you see you could draw connections and things, especially, intertextuality. We've discussed that at length. But one thing that's interesting is that watching Infinity Pool, I couldn't help but think this movie is the same as a book that we've covered, and that is J.G. Ballard's Cocaine Nights. And we covered this back in November, and it was just a book that I decided to throw in there because these things kind of, I don't know, J.G. Ballard is relevant, and especially in terms of a kind of a dystopian future. And Infinity Pool, like, really, I mean, it really is in many ways the same as, this J.G. Ballard book. And then as I was reading about Brandon Cronenberg, I saw that he one of the films that he intends on doing is a J.G. Ballard novel. He's doing an adaptation of a J.G. Ballard novel. So, of course, right? So, what we're gonna do is start with Possessor because I think Possessor is the stronger of the 2 films. Infinity Pool, has a number of, relevant and revelatory themes and motifs, but we're gonna start with Possessor and sort of make our way through that. And I gotta say that this is an example of, covering works of art that I think I wanna say that I've watched so that you don't have to, but I think that in terms of, our audience, our friends here, people who watch, think that people are either, like, really gonna watch these films or they will really avoid the films. There's no real middle ground, and, they are pretty hardcore, in every way. We've talked about the sort of aesthetic tourism that occurred, especially with Glamorama, and these films are really like an assault on your senses in a number of ways, and I think that there's a point to that. A part of it is this kind of, um, it's like making the audience part of something that is terrible, but you have to have an eye for discernment, of course. And so I feel like, with myself that I can watch these movies and look at the themes and motifs and see what is happening in the things. We can pretty much all do that here, without like buying into it. And, the 2 movies are really, I mean, I'll stop describing them in terms of how hardcore they are. Let's just get into what they're about. So Possessor is Brandon Cronenberg is the son of David Cronenberg, of course. And, um, and of course, David Cronenberg's themes in many of his works deal with, body horror, terror, and, uh, I don't know, not post-apocalyptic, but dystopian themes. Brandon Cronenberg is kind of like, to me, sort of a synthesized, distilled version of that. And I don't wanna say it's like for a new generation because the themes are the same, but they're just a little bit they're a little bit more distilled. And so, what happens in Possessor excuse me, what happens in Possessor is we have how do I start describing this movie? So so here's what the film's about. Basically, we have starts off with, there is a woman, she's in kind of a blue jumpsuit, sort of a, Hillary Crimeton trademark blue suit, more like a blue, like, the yellow jumpsuits in Moonraker, but it's blue. And we're like, "Okay, what's she doing?" And she walks into she first, she's standing in the mirror, so, of course, we have the mirror symbolism, and what's weird is we see her looking straight onto the mirror. The mirror symbolism is important because, think of some of the films where we have a protagonist who goes through a range of emotion talking to themselves in the mirror, and this occurs mainly in Raging Bull. There's a take on that in Boogie Nights, and of course, it's in that movie Two Girls and a Guy with Robert Downey Jr., and we're gonna see breaking of the mirror symbolism, but what happens is she's looking in the mirror, she's not saying anything. She's looking and she's smiling, and then she sort of starts laughing, and then she goes into a kind of a deep sadness and starts crying. And, of course, when she's looking into the mirror, she's also we are also she's kind of looking into us. So we're looking through the looking glass in a sense. And she takes a kind of a needle-like thing, a probe, and, like, sticks it into her brain. Of course, we know where she's sticking it in her brain. This is kind of the Arduino, and she has an instrument that she turns up. She keeps turning up in terms of the hertz, right? Um, and there's an electrical pulse, and we don't know what's going on yet. She next thing we see is she's, like, walking up these stairs. She walks into a party, and she walks right up to a guy in a suit with a woman, and it's weird because the guy kinda looks like, AJ, he kinda looks like Papa Ewok. She walks right up to him, and she stabs him in the neck. And then, the party kind of everybody kinda stands back, and then he's on the ground. This is really brutal. He's on the ground, and she, Chaz Manson family style, uh, uh, pretty much, like, guts the dude, okay? And at this point, this is, like, right at the start of the film. Then she has, like, a bag. She reaches in her bag, she takes out a, gun, and she, like, sticks it in her mouth and she says, "Pull me out." Okay, so what's going on? Well, she is the way that she says that, we hear kind of a double voice. It's been overlaid, right? And so we know that we're hearing her voice from somewhere else. And then she has trouble, committing the, MK Omega act, and then, She she can't do it, okay, and then the cops arrive, and then, of course, she commits, suicide by cop, and the woman also, by the way, at the start of this movie, remember the movie came out in 2020, and this is gonna play a role in this, or sort of a latter, we the motif here is a little bit different because some of the reviews are a little bit try to take on a circa 2020, theme where the woman is, African American woman, and then she's killed by the cops. Okay. And the next thing we see Andrea Riceborough, this actress. Remember she was in she's in a bunch of these Luminate confirmed movies, and she was in what's the Tom Cruise movie where he's on the spaceship and he's Eternal Return. He's always there are clones of himself, and the soundtrack's by M83. What's the movie? Filmed in Iceland. Somebody help me out here. Hmm. So that's Andrea Riseborough, and she wakes up, and she's in a like, a kind of a pod, a very Cronenberg-esque pod, okay, and so it's interesting because, you know, we're like, What's the connection, between these 2?" Well, the connection is that we learn Oblivion, thank you so much, thank you, Jethro and Andrew, so what we learn is that she it's called Possessor because she possesses the body of the person. So it's like psychic spies, but in real time in a real body. Okay, this is real. This is pretty interesting because this is like John Marks slash Jose Delgado, but put into like a kind of a real life. I mean, we're watching a film, but real life within the viewpoint of the film. And it's interesting that Jose Delgado is brought up because he will play his work will play a central role in the film. The film, remember the Delgado film of the bull, right? The mind control, the physical control of the mind is literally in the film. So anyway, she wakes up and then she has a kind of a Ewan Cameron, but as a woman psychiatrist or doctor, played by Jennifer Jason Leigh, and she goes through a kind of a Turing test right after that. And so what we learn is that like he is the assassin who is sent in through the brain chip or the brain wave to take possession of this person to eliminate a target, right? Well, the Turing test, kind of a Turing test, I suppose, is to test, whether she is back to reality or not. And the objects, of course, are heavily loaded with symbolism. We get her grandfather's pipe. She says, "Yes, this is mine." She describes it. They're at this table in this like little pod room. And the next object, of course, is a butterfly. So already we have Delgado, Luminate confirmed, Psychic Spies, and Monarch confirmed right away in the film. Okay. Um, he goes through a number of objects, and she's like, what's funny about this scene is that Jennifer Jason Leigh does this thing where she's like, "Okay, so how do you feel?" "Well, that target was eliminated." And then she takes her little, hand sanitizer slash lotion and like puts it on her hands and just gently rubs her hands. And then she's, you know, going through with the evaluation. And it's like it makes it such a sanitized we see a juxtaposition between what just happened and then the futuristic pod room, which is actually in the present. And then this kind of sanitized, like, they're talking about the people as he treats women like objects, objects like women, man. Right, a kind of Jackie Treehorn. But I just found that to be a small thing in the film and one of the most disturbing things, how she rubs her hands together. Really small moment in the film. But she says basically like, "Okay, I need a break. I need a vacation. This is getting to me." And she's like, "Why do you, she's kind of like, "Why do you need a vacation?" And it's like, well, I mean, look what she does. So we learned that like we can tell from context this is some sort of um they are contracted out to do this. They work for some sort of, three letter thing that is eliminating targets, right? And so then she gets dressed and she goes home. Well, when she goes home, we see her sort of in the streets, and then she's looking, and there's like a long corridor of suburbia, like garage land with these houses and row houses and garages down this corridor. It's framed like we have two pillars. And then at the very end, we have her house. And in her house, she goes in and she meets her husband. Her husband, of course, is played by Donald Sutherland's one of Donald Sutherland's other sons, who's this, he's kind of a professorial, beardy looking guy, big mop of hair, and she has a son. And then they have like they have a party, they have some friends over. She's not she We can tell that she's not really with it, but one of the things is that she keeps having these mental sort of break flashbacks of like weird reflective, refractive mirror imagery scenes where it's like her face her face in a continuous, like, infinite line. And, of course, that's supposed to be the personae, right? So, persona means mask, and in Ezra Pound's Personae, the book is named such because that is supposed to represent it's a tie-in with Greek drama and how in Greek drama, it takes on a religious significance where the actors in the play will come out into the amphitheater and will don a mask. That's where we get the tragedy and the comedy masks, right? And we get various masks. We get this later with Commedia dell'arte, and the characters are supposed to show the audience that they represent the various guises of the characters that they take on. And in Greek drama, this is supposed to be representative of, they are taking on the outer symbolism of the inner habitation, possession of the gods who are in this religious parade, right? The Bacchic rites, etc. But in Ezra Pound, the persona is supposed to represent the way that the landscape, the literal landscape, has been fragmented with the Great War, been torn up, and the trenches, and we have the entire world, we have Europe especially fragmented and at war with person against person. And then that is supposed to, in Ezra Pound's book, in his book of poems, it kind of seeps into the mind and the subconscious and the psyche, so that we have this fragmentation of the mind, so that in modernity we can't really tell what is what anymore. And in the film, this is interesting because this goes on, especially in Infinity Pool, this goes on to be something where now we have the war on the self, and the great we set. And it's kind of it's like an outer show for what's happening on the inside of the characters, especially in terms of their kind of spiritual crisis. Well, um, she tells her husband, "Can you send them away?" He goes away, and then next thing we see, the husband and wife sexing, and she is like totally not there while it's happening. We see her kind of staring off into the distance, and then she kind of turns and, like, bites him or whatever, but we see what she's seeing, and we see her seeing the various faces, and especially the last target that she just eliminated, and we see that this is, like, where she is. So, obviously, this is breaking her mind. This is weird because it's like DID, MPD, but, personified, okay? So, the next thing we see in the film is we see this guy, Colin. Their last name is Voss, and we see, Colin, who's played by Christopher Abbott, who is also starting to be in a number of these Luminate confirmed movies. Remember he was in was it Slaughterhouse-Five? He was in the Kurt Vonnegut movie, but anyway, Christopher Abbott, we see him, and we can tell that he's going to be the next target, okay? So she calls into work at night, and she's like, "You know what? I don't need a vacation. I'm ready for the next thing. Ready for the next operation." And they say, "Okay, sure." He calls, Jennifer Jason Leigh. They set her up. Well, then we see him, and he works for a we learn that he is a, yayo dealer, and he is dating the daughter of some sort of industrialist, and that guy, who's played by Sean Bean, is gonna be the next target. So, they discuss what they're gonna do, how they're gonna set it up. She is going to possess him, like, 2 or 3 days early, start to become erratic, to leave little gaslighting clues, that, so that when the event happens, people will be able to blame that, on his mental state. He goes into work, she takes possession of him, and then he goes into work, and he works in some sort of, um, Vetimerse, a conglomerate or corporation, where he walks in and they're all seated at these little desk pods. He's wearing his kind of a steampunk version of the Oculus, and his job is to, like, observe a room and note what the various curtains look like in the room. But when he's doing that, and this is like data collection but personified, but when he's doing that, because what he sees is essentially like he's designing in the Vetimerse, right? And when he does that, he sees people uh, being um, being private, let's say. And then when that happens, we know that she has inhabited him and that she's starting to kind of break. He gets these messages like through his audio, and it's like, what is going on? Well, then he's like, he can't take it. He walks into the bathroom, and she, because she's possessing him, has kind of a weird mental breakdown, throws up, and passes out on the floor of this place. Um, the next thing we see is he's at home. He goes back to his luxury, high-rise condo or whatever. I guess this is Toronto because it looks a lot there's a lot in the film that looks a lot it reminded me a lot like, of Enemy. Remember the Denis Villeneuve film Enemy with Jake Gyllenhaal? And that's interesting because that deals with the doppelganger, which is this essentially, in a way, the person meets himself in the film, but we also have this idea of the double or some sort of possession. And we also another thing we have is the inversion and the flip of the perspective. So when we're looking at the cityscape, it turns around upside down and then turns right back, right side up. So we know that um, the everything is being inverted, everything is changed, and that now we're in weird psychic territory. We're in weird sort of inverted, upside down, Get Out, Stranger Things, hellscape land. But it's all embodied within the life of this character. So to see him, he goes home and his fiance is there and she's got 3 friends over, and they're all, girl bosses talking about stuff. He's not really into it. They're of course, he's the yayo dealer, so they're, doing all types of things, and then next thing we see is, like, it turns blue, and, they're sexing, okay? I'm really trying to, it's 5 o'clock, folks. So, I'm trying to be, as behaved as we can in terms of the language, for the affiliates. So, so that happens. And when that happens, it's interesting because we know that she is inhabiting him, but she is, um, having this connection with this woman. And something really wild happens, which is that we see her back in we see flashbacks back to her, and she is let's say, a brave and stunning, person who is a Baphomet character, okay? That's what she is in real life, and we didn't know that. It and th it's pretty hard to watch, obviously. This is totally like hell world in a number of ways, okay? Um, but Um, kind of moving forward here, we see them go to we know that he's acting erratic, they're kind of like, "What's wrong with you?" And we know and he does this thing where he's like, "So I was going and then this is what happened." So he like sort of it's almost like he's talking to his alters. And what's interesting is when she leaves for work the next morning, we see him looking in the mirror. And then we see him looking out. Of course, there are windows. They're looking out the window, so he's looking at himself and at the outside world. So we know that the Andrea Riceborough character is looking at herself, but through the eyes of the dude. But she is also talking to her handler back in the pod station, and she's like reporting, right? And what's interesting about this is that he is reporting what's gonna happen. They're going to go to the party. He's acting erratic. And the DID thing is like when the character is talking to his alter, he's literally talking to his alter because she is inside of his mind. Does that make sense? So then we see them go to the party, and the party is like a big, not big, but it's a soiree at Scene Bean's house. And Scene Bean, again, is like some sort of industrialist. And he is standing, on this balcony inside of his house between the, Yakin and Boaz, and, he's saying, like, I couldn't you're all worthless, but I couldn't just kidding, I couldn't have done it without you. And he's got his, like, he's got his button-up collar, just kind of like Jake Gyllenhaal in, Prisoners. And, the people are all watching him, they're all drinking champagne. And then what happens is Sean Bean says something to his, industrialist friends, and he's like, "Yeah, my son-in-law over there is a, POS," right? He thinks he's gonna be, in the family, but, he's got a long way to go or whatever. And then Christopher Abbott slash Andrea Riceborough walks up to him and, tries to instigate, right? He, like, kinda puts his hand on his shoulder, and he tells him, basically, "F you." And Sean Bean's like, "Why don't you piss off?" Right? So, all the people at the party are like, "Whatever," and then he turns around, he tries to start a fight. The security guards, his big, Moose and Rocco come in and kinda separate him, and it's interesting because when he's pulled away, he says, "I'm a giant. I'm a giant." Like he's become some sort of, l you know, like a some sort of big, like, fallen angel trying to in his little dominion here, like he's rising bigger, right? Like he's, a Miltonian Satan, like, sitting on the adamantine rock, but he kind of gets chucked out of the house. Well, he leaves, and then he comes back into the party after everybody's gone, and he sits down at the table where Sean Bean is, and Sean Bean is drunk, and he puts his, strap on the table. Okay, so we know what's coming next. Well, Sean Bean says, Look, you again. I'm off to bed." And then when he gets up, he kind of tries to go back and grab the gat, but Christopher Abbott kind of dodges him, and he has a fire poker in his hand, and he slashes him across the neck. Sean Bean falls down on the ground, and he proceeds to beat him, like, violently. And one of the things about Cronenberg is, in a way, this is a lot like, I imagine people watching, I don't know, Titus Andronicus for the first time, and this is Clockwork Orange style ultra violence, but it is graphic, and we get body horror to the max. He, he jams the fire poker into Sean Bean's mouth and, like, grinds it, and then he pops out his eyeball, and, then his fiancée walks in. He grabs the, strap, and he, pops off. She's then crawling through the kitchen. He walks in, and he, coup de graces her. Then he says, "Pull me out." But again, he can't commit the MK Omega, Springmeyer slash John Marks MK Omega Act, which is, of course, the programmed monarch who is supposed to, eliminate themselves at the end, and he can't do that. Um, one of the Some of the imagery that we see here in between is that we see that when a when Andrea Riceborough is supposed to go back into herself out of the body of the possessed target, um, we see, like, a very, um, what is this? Beyond the Black Rainbow imagery. And this is, like, very Beyond the Black Rainbow, because we see, like, this sort of mask of a face that looks like wax, and it kind of starts melting away, and then eventually the new face comes back, and that's supposed to be Andrea Riceborough. Well, in this, what happens is this time that happens, but it's like he's not able to do it. So then he leaves, and now the agency or whatever it is has a problem because they weren't able to the character wasn't able to commit the act to go back to home base, so the person isn't able to be blamed for the, like, perfect, no frills, assassination. That makes sense. And now we know that because of that, because there is a real, um, the Christopher Abbott character has been kidnapped and put under, the chip or whatever it is gonna start to, like, fade after a number of days. So now we have a problem because we have 2 people in 1 body, okay? And they're gonna fight to come back to reality. It's very much like Get Out, right? Um, and we also learned that Sean Bean has somehow survived. When you're watching the film, like there's no way. But of course, he's somehow survived. The other character is dead, but now he's on the run. The Christopher Abbott character is on the run, and uh, yes, very panos cosmatos. So what he does is he goes back to his home, which is actually her home, and he's standing outside and he's looking at the garages and he's looking at the house, and he sees his son, her son, and I couldn't. I mean, the casting for Andrea Riceboro's son in this had to have been. They had to have looked at the let's say Gunny Josh event, right? Remember Gunny Josh? I don't wanna say it, but the character looks exactly like him, dressed, looks exactly like him, so we're wondering where this is going. Well, he brings the kid over and he's like, "Is that your house?" And this is immediately, like, creeper territory, and then, of course, the dad comes out of the front door and he says, "Come on, come back home." Well, then later that night, he's still standing there, standing sort of half in the shadow, half in the light, just kinda staring there, and, night has fallen, and then he walks up to the door. He, rings the doorbell, and you're thinking, "Dude, don't open the door, man. Answer the door with that thing, okay? Don't just open the door, at least, right?" Well, he kinda cracks the door, and he says, "I'm a friend of your wife's. I gotta talk to you. We work together." And then he, busts the door in, busts into the house, and he starts, you know, uh, doing things to the dad, right? And he's saying basically, we can tell that the 2 characters are fighting for sort of supremacy within the one body because Christopher Abbott is waking up and doesn't know why he's there, what he's doing, but his alter, that's Andrea Riceborough, knows exactly where she is, and she's wondering, "How do I get back home to reality, to the pod, and come back as myself?" Um, and then one interesting thing happens, which is that we see the Christopher Abbott character put on this mask, okay? And so essentially here, what he's doing, and this is, I think I've talked to you guys about the trademark here, the book that I've been working on, which is about a character, who's like loosely like Mirror Man, who who is a monarch Kathy O'Brien-esque, killer who wears a mask of his own face. Well, that's exactly what happens in this, except the mask that he puts on is a crude kind of, Michael Myers mask, but of Andrea Riceborough, so that what the characters see is in the mirror, and he sees himself, but with this weird mask of another person on top of him, so he's looking, like, from a distance through the eye holes of the mask, and we've seen this in a number of works that we've read, especially we saw it in American Psycho, and I'm trying to think of the other works where the characters they were split, and other people who observed them looked, and we saw that they looked like they were looking out of a mask of someone else, um, like they weren't there. We saw it in The Witches of Eastwick, we saw it in American Psycho, I'm trying to think of the other works where we saw it. But so then what happens is it's really the Christopher Abbott, character. Shouts out to Genghis for that 9.99, super chat. Thank you for that $10 super chat, Genghis. Appreciate you, homeboy. If you wanna support me, please, click those links. I'll be reading super chats, at the end. I really could use your support. Thank you so much. Smash that like. Please share the stream. Thank you all, everybody, for being here. It's getting cold out there. And did you know, by the way, that we're in our 12th month here? We've been going almost a year. So we've gotten a lot covered, well over 100 streams here, 100 works. And we're going to keep on rolling. So if you want to sponsor a stream, drop me $100, drop me a fat chat, and I'll cover that. I got a bunch of sponsor streams coming up to cover. On Monday, we've got our Jerry stream. We're doing Sunday, we're doing William Burroughs, and the Yage, we're doing the Yage letters and William Burroughs. And then on Monday, we've got a big stream. We're covering Ender's Game with our homeboy BPF from the Crucible. So shouts out to both of them. It didn't mean to blow the bloody doors off. So please, so please think about supporting me if you can, and if you feel like it, and I really appreciate it. So then what happens is Christopher Abbott sort of takes over, and he goes to the apartment of one of the girl bosses that is friends with his fiance because they've been having an affair. And then we see a dude walk in. That's one of his friends that he works with at the Vetimers Pod Corp. And the guy says, "Look, man, I'm here to help you. Don't worry about it. I'm the only. What's been going on?" And then, of course, when he turns around, he gets shot. But he's shot by some sort of Existenz, DEW bolt gun taser, and he goes out. And we know, of course, from what we know about Andrea Riceborough and her intel ties, that this guy is also probably possessed or he's something else. So when he wakes up, he's being probed in his duino gland, and that they're trying to recalibrate his mind. And then the guy says, "Listen, man, listen. I'm a plant. I'm a collaborator. I was here for you." And then Christopher Abbott says, why don't you just kill me?" And the guy says, "I can't do that. I'm a Christian, but I am here to help you," which is interesting. Because then we see that he's calibrating him. He's trying to get back to. We see the inner imagery of him trying to get back in through the labyrinth into himself or into herself. And then when he wakes up, the dude is dead. He's killed him, and he's also killed the girl. And now he doesn't know what to do. Well, he uh he makes his way back home. I'm cutting out a lot here, but he of the movie. But then he goes back home. He sees her husband, and then we see that he is eliminated by the Ghani Josh character. And then the last thing we see is uh, that because he also shoots the Ghani Josh character, and that's interesting because it means that Andrea Riceborough has just killed her own husband and son in real life in the movie. And then we see the one eye, and then the Ghani Josh character says, "Pull me out." So we know that was also a possessed. And then the blood on the floor forms together, it congeals, and it forms a monarch. It forms a butterfly on the floor, and that's the end. So, what do we get from the movie? Well, we get a pretty, again, I would say that this movie is, I mean, it's wild. It's like Panos Cosmatos and early Denis Villeneuve. It's also, of course, there are elements of Elder Cronenberg in there, but it is like body horror, DID, MPD, Labyrinthine Minds, Psychic Spies, Psychic Driving, three-letter agencies, MK Delta, MK Omega, all of these things in one film. And we also see at some points when he's going through the recalibration, we see him watching a film of Jose Delgado's mind control of the bull. And so remember the goal, remember Jose Delgado, the goal is the total physical control of the mind. And that is exactly what happens. When we see it back at Pod World, when she's going through a recalibration, we have a weird double futuristic sort of like Mies van der Rohe-esque like sofa thing where he's in the pod and she's lying down and she's got this mask on. And then Jennifer Jason Leigh is facing the opposite way, and she is talking to her in real life there, giving her the orders. But the mask she wears is like a full body mask with weird it's like a plague mask, but it's got little weird levels to it, like circular levels. And I can't help but think of like, the circular levels of the concentric circles going down into hell. And we already had the Baphomet imagery, but now we've got it reversed and doubled. So we've got like an inverse world with the way that the two characters are laid out on the screen. It's also very, like, futuristic and soft, like, soft colors, if that makes sense. Um, the whole movie is, like, kind of muted in terms of its aesthetic, but the that is to contrast with the violence in the movie, which is so heavy. And so that's pretty much the film. I thought I would take a look at what some other people have said about this film before we get to Infinity Pool. And it's interesting because another thing with the MASQUE is that this came out in 2020, and we can't help but think of the way that that plays into the dynamics within the narrative. Shouts out to Joseph out there who drops 5 quid and says, "What you think about Rene Girard? Talking of doubles, I don't know. I don't know about Rene Girard. I'm rolling too fast here, so I can't think. But thank you for that 5 quid super chat. Appreciate you, homeboy. Um, when I see Rene Girard, I think of Rene Ricard. Rene Ricard was the has nothing to do with this, but Rene Ricard um was the sort of art fixer who he wrote about Basquiat, and he connected Basquiat to Andy Warhol um in real life, and he was a kind of he was a poet slash art journalist, but that has nothing to do with Rene Girard. Um yes, Mask of the Red Death, certainly. So did we cover We did cover Mask of the Red Death. Oh, and we just did our post stream with our Polish homeboy. All right, so this says Brandon Cronenberg's Possessor is obsessed with tensions between mind and body, the old and new technologies, an analog man in a digital world. Cronenberg invests a narrative along the lines of his father David's Existenz and Christopher Nolan's Inception, with psychedelic imagery and jolts of gouging, bone splitting, unambiguously in camera body horror that rival anything in modern cinema for tactility and pure outrageousness. This is by Chuck Bowen. Um, I don't I see where he's going with the Christopher Nolan Inception, but I think that that's a bit simplistic because because we're not in dream world. This is more you and Cameron world than dream world. And I see where he's going in terms of that, but there's really no other connection, especially in terms of the aesthetic here. Um, he says the film's violence serves as a kind of relief for its perpetrators who are displaced by technological doodads and come to long for tangibility, corporeal terra firma, no matter how perverse. Cronenberg represents new school displacement via old school effects, refuting the everything digital flimflam of more polished, respectable tentpole Possessor. Opens with its most outrageous sequence: a young certain type of woman plugs what appears to be the power cord of an amp into her scalp, blood gurgling out of her head as her face twists in misery. He navigates the corridors of a fancy restaurant that's rife with sharp, dangerous-looking decorations and fleshy noir colors that instantaneously establish the film's aura of hallucinatory violence. That's true, because the hallucinatory violence comes about because of the number one, the kind of prismatic mirror imagery, and also, yeah, like I mentioned, there's a contrast between the kind of muted colors of the analog world versus the futurism of the technical um, digital world. But what's interesting about the film is that there's not any there is there is a digital element to the film in terms of the aesthetic, but it looks like it must have been all done with models and masks. And I'm sure they use computer enhancement, but it's done in a very Panos Cosmatos way, Beyond the Black Rainbow and Mandy way, where we see the way that the characters are trying to make it back to, as this writer says, terra firma, is like or back through the labyrinth, um, is is done in a completely different way. It's not through some sort of digital landscape. It's not like in Shutter Island, right? This is like or in Inception, right, where he's going down the floors into the basement or into the basement of his mind and accessing memories and then trying to get back to real life. Um, it's done in a way where it's like we're experiencing the utter kind of spiritual horror of the possession that the various characters are in the agency are trying to accomplish. Um, it says, arriving at an upper level of the building, Holly approaches a heavy-set, well-to-do looking middle-aged white man in a dining hall and stabs him vigorously to death with a steak knife. Cronenberg's staging leaves nothing to the imagination, like Titus Andronicus. Interesting because Titus Andronicus comes early in Shakespeare's career, and then and the violence is so vivid in the book, especially in the text. But later on in Shakespeare, the violence will take place off stage, leaving more to the imagination. But there's something to be said for what Cronenberg does here, putting it all fully on display because the subject matter is in your face. This is like we're in this mode and we're what we're seeing here. This is why I think the film is so revelatory because we're seeing here a glimpse of a kind of cornerstone of the way that the dichotomy between the elites and the everyday people and targets, and we're seeing the way that it is now, especially now in 2023. Host Gwait Wee said Cronenberg's, or rather within it, Cronenberg's stage. We let's see. It says Holly produces a gun, trying and failing to summon the nerve to turn it on herself as police close in, seemingly speaking to herself, right to her altar, but it's actually to her actual altar. Holly pleads with someone to let her out, and the cops gun her down. The sequence is inherently charged even before Cronenberg injects another wrinkle of perversity into the mix. Holly was possessed by a certain type of woman who works for a cluster of freelance spy assassins who hack into people's minds to frame them for crimes for the gain of third party clients. Suddenly, a visceral sequence that seemed ostentatiously nasty for its own sake is freighted with social resonance as these people are benefiting from the framing and killing of the other people. Now, think of 2020, and I think that this is a bit derivative. It's like, okay, I get the writer writing this, especially at the time of, what was happening, but this this supersedes all of that, or at least it makes use of it in a way that it always has. And I think that happens to be a kind of happy accident in terms of the filmmaking to load it with more, as this writer says, social freight, but that seems like a pretty surface level analysis. Um, and this twist is intensified by clever misdirection. Before we learn the truth of Tazia's profession, we're driven to wonder if she was trying to prevent a murder rather than engineer it, as Tazia is introduced writhing in earnest pain in a coffin shaped vessel disconnecting from Holly's consciousness. Cronenberg initially engenders sympathy for Tazia, whose profession is ultimately shown to be evil. Yeah, there's no, you don't get that watching it. At least I'm sure everybody watching this, if you watch the film, you would know right away what's happening. There is no we're not guessing that she's trying not to do it. We are guessing that she cannot commit the Omega Act, the John Marks Springmeyer Omega Act. She can't remember the Terminator stream we just did with Coteasy? I can't self-terminate. Right? That's it. Because of the way that the programming works. It's not anything having to do with not completing your mission. And the scene that we see at the beginning of the film is simply shouts out to Amptown out there for rubies the size of grapefruits. Master Wayne when I was in Burma. Uh, Master Wayne when I was in Burma, I saw quack walks the size of diamonds, Master Wayne. Shouts out to Amptown out there for that $10 super chat. Really appreciate you, homegirl. Thank you so much for all your support. Again, shouts out to Genghis for that $10 super chat. And shouts out to Joseph T for that 5 quid. If you want to support me directly, I would appreciate you guys. And now I appreciate any kind of support you can give me. Um, Mixie says he's picking up his Kuba Din Din. Shouts out to Mixie out there. Um, so what was I saying? It says let's see. In both cases, people are subliminally controlled in order to serve the master cause of corporate profit. That's not really the master cause, isn't this? This is power and profit. The profit seems to be secondary. And though Tazia may be one of the manipulators, she's nearly as subservient to the system as her victims, as the process of possession is wearing her down, detaching her from her own identity. Well, yes, because reading deeply or deeper into this, especially with the Delgado elements within the film, we would say that, yes, she's probably a dark passenger in her own body in a sense because she has been programmed this way. Right. I mean, this literally occurs. I don't think that's too deep to read into the film, because we do have Kathy O'Brien-esque characters in this with the Gonnie Josh character at the end of the movie. They're doing this to Keats in the film. So there's no limit. No limit. Got that masterpiece. No limit, baby. There's no limit to what they're willing to do in order to accomplish their mission with this. There's it's completely amoral. It's completely satanic. What they're doing in this is total and complete Satanism in the movie. I mean, it is it is brutal. And we see that of course this is used like a kind of sub project 119 um personified. It says in chilling detail, Tazia practices acting familial before visiting her son, an estranged husband, who again is played by Donald Sutherland's son, Kiefer's brother, Michael. Michael, let's go. Remember that scene in The Lost Boys? Trying to remind herself how to be motherly and wifely, interested in the everyday textures of their lives. Tazia is pale and sickly, a ghost in flesh who's being erased in a manner that suggests the ravages of drug addiction, which again is a plays into this in a meta way because that's what a character she inhabits is. He's addicted and dealing. And then I couldn't help but think of Ghost in the Machine, tying it with Delgado. Possession. I know Delgado didn't write Ghost in the Machine. Possession and data mining. Who wrote Ghost in the Machine? Kessler. Who wrote Ghost in the Machine, guys? Sorry, I'm got too many names on my mind. Possession and data mining converge when Tasia, the master agent of her group, earmarked to eventually replace her supervisor, Girder, is assigned to inhabit the body of Colin Tate. Interesting sort of predictive probe here. With the Tate name, a successful drug. I'm not saying that means anything. It's probably just but it is interesting. Also, girder because she's like a steel girder. She's the she's the handler in the place that she's supposed to go back to in terms of terra firma again, right? Um, see, this says a successful drug dealer who craves the Parse inheritance and wants it to seem as if Colin has lost his mind in a relapse and killed John, Ava, and himself. Tazia, weak and unstable, is loaded into Colin's mind only to find that his consciousness is willing to put up a fight for control of his body. What ensues is a surreal, mercilessly violent war of the minds. This says in Inception, mental violation is equated arbitrarily to levels in a video game, signifying Nolan's ongoing effort to render subjective elements of human life tediously objective. Cronenberg also physicalizes subjective terrain, but in a manner that nevertheless preserves the mess of neuroses. If Nolan is a classical violinist, Cronenberg is a punk. I find that to be so lame. A punk drummer thrashing away, fashioning images that suggest what might happen if Ingmar Bergman's persona, there you go, were run through the filter of splatterpunk horror. It's not really like that. As Tazia and Colin battle, their faces alternately melt and converge, culminating in an astonishing image. Tazia's face as a kind of clay puppet, which Colin crushes inward so as to cast her out of his body because he's being inhabited and he's trying to cast her out. Um, if only, if only he could cast her out through prayer instead of the kind of um, satanic postmodern nihilistic nothingness that we see in the film. It says the possessor favors nihilist spectacle to existentialism. Cronenberg is more interested in exploring emotional dislocation than Nolan. Yes, he certainly is. The emotional dislocation in Nolan, not in the Prestige. I think he does a great job of it in the Prestige, or even in Memento. Um, I think takes a turn for the more commercial and superficial emotional dislocation of just outright weeping and yeah, I mean, I'm not saying they don't do a good job of it in they don't have a good go of it in, like, Inception, But I think that the way that it's presented and the way that it's written is a bit more of a surface level than we get in terms of it okay, so it's more like we say this in literature all the time, right? In Nolan, it's more of a they're telling us what's happening. Whereas in this, I think it's stronger because they're showing us what's happening in terms of trying to cast out the possessor and trying to relocate the terra firma, as it says, or the actual mind of the inhabitant. This says passages in which Tazia as Colin wanders the corridors of the Pars Empire, befuddled and lost, blending into the lurid skylines and chic corporate feng shui of omnipresent cameras succinctly and poignantly communicate the alienating effects of a polished and impersonal world that encourages everyone to steal everything from everyone else. As Possessor has an uncommonly nasty stinger in its tail that's worthy of Saki, O. Henry, or PKD. Punchline that asks us to consider the amorphous boundary separating Tazia's nightmares from her forbidden yearnings. And I wrote, no, it's the Gunny Josh ending that does that. And also, it is not really nihilist in the sense that it supersedes that. It's completely Satanist. Um, I wrote persona exactly as I thought, but re Ezra Pound's personae, fragment fragments what did I wrote? Fragmentary in the modernist slash postmodernist landscape that internalizes from landscape wasteland to the mind and the psyche. This seems to be the kind of war on the self that's come to fruition through the apotheosis of Karunka and the Great Reset. So that's from Slant, whatever. And then next we get Infinity Pool. So again, if you want to support me, please think about sending out those super chats. Maybe I'll read a couple of these super chats right now. We got some support last night from our homeboy, the real John Connor, who sent 15 bucks. Thank you to our homeboy, the real John Connor. Appreciate you, homeboy. And because he has supported me so much, I'm going to be doing the Norm Macdonald Not a Memoir book. And also, we got a super chat from Jason who sent, let's see, who sent 10 bucks last night. Thank you so much. Appreciate you, homeboy. And then let's see. Yo, shouts out to our homeboy Mixky who sent 30 bucks for goodness gracious sakes alive. We 55. So shouts out to our homeboy Technoart Graphics, Mixky out there for that 30 bucks. Thank you so much, homeboy. Really appreciate you. That helps me so much. And also shouts out again to Amy for that 10 shouts out to Amy for that $10 PayPal. Really appreciate you, homegirl. Thank you so much. All right, next on to Infinity Pool. Hope you guys are liking this. Shouts out to our homeboy Andrew out there who sends 10 bucks super chat. He says, although tempted, I'm gonna skip watching Infinity Pool. Looks way too brutal and degen. Possessor was bad enough, so I appreciate your breakdown. Yes, no problem, homeboy. I don't blame you. Um, so you know, I think this is a good time to be doing this because the movie is barely out, and so I thought it would be good to get in there kind of early in a way and and do a yeah, and this says that was my first super chat from Andrew Turner. Was it? I don't think so, but it's my first super chat in terms of YT. So thank you so much, Andrew, who has supported us in the past. Thank you so much, Andrew. Um, yeah, but I'm sure there are plenty of reviews, and I've got the printed reviews from Infinity Pool, but those are going to be the normie ones. So I thought it would be good to dive in and and see what the work was about, and then to do Possessor, and then, of course, when after I watched the 2 films, um, they're they have similar themes, an overarching, overriding theme, of course, that we've just discussed and we're about to further discuss, but, I shouts out to Kristen out there who's working and can't look at the chat. Love you, Kristen. Thank you so much, Slow Boy Whiteboard. Um, and but Infinity Pool is different. It of course, as Cronenberg, B. Cronenberg, takes on, more, right, as he gets more in terms of Holly weird. Have you guys ever heard that term before, Holly weird? Um, of course, the themes are gonna, the films are gonna kind of expand. It's a bigger film. It's filmed in 2 locations, a foreign locations, filmed partly in Croatia. But, I think that Possessor is, stronger. Both, again, I will say, are films that definitely deal with the revelatory aspects of society, where we are, where we're headed, and I think it's an interesting both are an interesting watch. But, again, like with you guys, I think that, you'll either wanna watch these movies or you will, or you will, like, totally not wanna watch them. There's no, like, real middle ground, and I will say that, like, these are not films to be watched, no, these are not films to be watched around the affiliates or the family, folks. They are pretty, stark. Okay, so let's get into Infinity Pool, and again, um, go back if you haven't seen it or you wanna rewatch it, if you're driving along, you wanted something to listen to or whatever. Go back and watch my J.G. Ballard Cocaine Nights analysis. That's the name of the book, so we can say that. And this is Cocaine Nights by J.G. Ballard. And of course, what that book was about, just a quick rehash, is we get a character whose brother has been arrested, and he goes to a resort, a kind of a Costa del Sol resort, to find out why he's been arrested. He gets gaslit into a group of elites in a kind of a Fight Club scenario, but for elites who are playing the most dangerous game. And then at the end of the book, spoilers, but you can see my analysis. At the end of the book, he fulfills the role that his brother did and willingly gives himself up and takes the fall for part of the murder that he has been a part of. And, of course, this plays it. We've discussed how the themes in film seem to continuously be Gnosticism, cannibalism, and the most dangerous game. And Possessor was a kind of most dangerous game, but it wasn't with the pyramid people having fun. This was part of their MO and their operations. In Infinity Pool, we get, like, the absolute most degen type of fun, if that's what they think it's called, that they can be engaged in, which is basically a place where they go to a resort and they kind of have the veneer of having rules that we learn are just arbitrary, and they are there to break all the rules possible. And this is the kind of Al Crowley absolute liberation, where these people's, darker instincts and darker minds, play out in a fallen world where they do the most horrible things. And that is what happens in that book, in the Ballard book, and it's what happens in Infinity Pool. So what happens in Infinity Pool? Well, it's just got Alexander Skarsgård, and Skarsgård is, again, he's like Andrea Riceborough in the sense that he's in a lot of these Luminate confirmed movies. He was just in um, what's it called? Barbarian. He was in The Northman. We've seen him in a bunch of this stuff. This also has who Mia Goth is in that movie X that came out or at the same time as Barbarian. And so she is I mean, I don't know really anything about her, but whoever she is, she's perfect for this movie because, like, for one thing, like, she seems to have no eyebrows. It's really weird. And maybe it was just my mind playing tricks on me watching it, and she has really light eyebrows. But surely they did this like so that she kind of looks like all skull. And she's supposed to be like, she's basically a Lilith figure in the movie who's like all skull and no eyebrows. Um, and what happens is we see that Alexander Skarsgård and his wife are at a resort in some fictional country, and the country is supposed to be like a combination of a kind of far eastern Singapore slash um, like Goa mixed with a a kind of a fascist element, like they're in some sort of like weird, I don't know, post Croatian Spanish. It's like a combination of a bunch of things. Okay, and because the police are all in the kind of Spanish black uniforms or like a black shirted uniforms of the Italians in that certain time, and the flag of the country that they have on their badges looks like both a sun wheel and a kind of a Singaporean flag, if that makes sense. The imagery at the resort is like very Goa-esque, is very, Indian. And they're wearing like they're the they see this one thing where like they have a sort of a cultural night and like they have Indonesian like masks. Um, and you remember when JD said in one of his analyses that, uh, when you're watching a movie or if you go to a place and the dude has like masks lined up on the wall or in the glass, that dude is luminate confirmed, right? Well, I mean, that's what happens in the film. So anyway, Alexander Skarsgård is there with his wife. He's a writer. He's a failed writer. Well, I don't know if he's a failed writer. He's written one book. And that's what we think at the beginning. He's written one book, and this is interesting because very synchro. Because I just watched that Woody Allen film, You'll Meet a Tall Dark Stranger, where Josh Brolin kind of plays the same character in a way at the start of the movie. But anyway, um, so he's got one book. He's there like for inspiration, and it's too bad, that he's going to get Satan's inspiration when he is reborn through a blood ritual in the film. So what happens is he's there, he meets this other couple, they're on this, holiday at this resort. The other couple is this kind of, suave talking French guy, this beardy French guy, and Mia Goth, who immediately comes up to him and she's like, "I loved your first novel." And he's like, "Really? You've heard of me?" And she talks him up. Immediately it's too much, right? She knows who he is, and then they invite them out for a day, like for a picnic, and they leave the compound. The resort is a compound, very, kind of Cancun-esque, but this has like full on razor wire outside and armed guards. And they get in like a weird, they get in like a Hunter S. Thompson Cadillac, a white whale, and they go out and they're out at the beach. And we see him reclining, we see his one eye, looking, and he's looking at Mia Goth, and then he gets up, and there's a really gross scene where, he gets up, he walks over, and he's, relieving himself, and then she comes over, and an HJ, ensues, and it's, like, really it's of course, it's like, it's whatever, okay, but he lets this happen, and his wife and the guy are right over there talking, okay? So, immediately, we have like this gaslighting, and I don't use the term like I'm just kind of like, I'm not using it lightly. I mean, that's actually what they're doing in this. This is like they are literally doing this in the film, and then she inducts him through this kind of, a weird kind of sex magic thing, and then there's going to be a sacrifice, okay? And what happens is they get back in the car, they've been drinking, he drives, they say, "You drive, don't let him drive." So he gets in the car and he's driving, and the lights go out on the car, and he's trying to fix the lights, and when he looks back up, a guy, a grifter type, is walking across the road, and he immediately, like, runs over the guy. Well, he bashes into him, and it's interesting that the way that the guy dies is his face bashes into the windshield, so again, we have the kind of mirror window symbolism, and he walks up, and the guy's face has been crushed, okay? So, again, the dissolution of the ego, the unpersoning of the regular people. We're gonna find that this guy was a farmer, and, so they're like, "What should we do? What should we do?" And then Mia Goth comes out, and he's like, we should call somebody." And Mia Goth's like, "Don't call anybody." Right? This is, "Do you know what they do to people here? Do you know what they do?" And they listen to her, and then the other guy drives. They drive back to the compound. There are guards at the gate. Shouts out to Elias for that $20 super chat. Thank you so much, homeboy. Really appreciate you. And they get there, and the guards are like, "You're not supposed to be outside the compound." And they're like, "Sorry," and they lie. They don't have their car with them. and they make up a lie that, they're just gonna say they were somewhere else. Well, in the morning, he gets a knock on the door, and it's the authorities. They come in and they're like, "Come with us," and they take Skarsgård and the wife, and they go and they are interrogated. When they're interrogated, um, he's interrogated by this detective, um, doctor guy who is a real Mengele type, who comes in and he says, "Well, your wife told us everything. Told us that you stole the car and that that you ran over the guy because you wanted to." Okay. And then he has to sign the document. The document is in, some sort of kind of I don't know, weird Esperanto language he doesn't understand. That part reminded me of The Beach. You remember that scene in The Beach where what's the character's name that Leo plays? I can't remember. Excuse me, Alex Garland's The Beach, where he is, where what's his name? Is it Bugs Bunny? No, Daffy Duck is the guy's name. Played by Robert Carlyle. Robert Carlyle. And then the game was mine. Remember in Train Spotting? Robert Carlyle, remember, dies. We ought to do The Beach. I can't believe we haven't thought of that. We got to do Alex Garland's The Beach. We'll do the book and the film. Um, we've done Alex Garland before because we did his film Men. If you want to go back to that analysis, but so he signs the document, and then we learn that their island, wherever they are, which is obviously supposed to be the private getaway for the elites, has a law of blood feud. So basically, because he killed this farmer, the family has a right to take vengeance on him. Okay, so he's offered the chance to put himself under, and they're gonna make a double of him. They're gonna make a they don't say clone, but they're gonna make a double. So he has no choice. He has to. Excuse me. Hold on. Okay, I had to cough real loud. Sorry. And so this process, what happens is he walks in, they tell him stand up. He stands in a cruciform position. They strip him, they tell him to walk into a room. The room kind of floods with a muddy, murky looking blood goo. And then the next thing you know, he wakes up. So he's in a bloodbath. So we know that there's going to be a bloodbath and that he is being baptized in baptized by fire. It's red, and he's being baptized. He's being kind of satanic baptized in blood for what's about to happen in the rest of the film. He wakes up on a bed. They say, "How are you?" And then the Mangala guy takes him into the other room and says, Would you like to see your double? It turned out very well." They walk in and they take off the mask, and in this bath, in this vat, is him. He sees himself, and he's looking at the face. He's looking how lifelike it is, and then the face looks up at him. And so now the question, of course, and this is going to actually play a part in the dialogue. The question is he the one in the bath that's about to be executed, or is he the one that is still himself? Because he was asleep, now he's awake, and he doesn't know. And that also, remember, played a part in our prestige analysis because in the film, it doesn't happen in the book, but in the film, um, Hugh Jackman says, you don't know anything about sacrifice. Well, I didn't know every night whether I was going to be the one in the tank or the one in the balcony. So again, we have this double. It's weird how the doubles are like continuously playing a role in this stuff. And I'm not like again, I'm not like looking up, doubles literature or doppelgangers. It's just this stuff just seems to just pops up. Like he says in Heat, it's just up in the airwaves, man. You just got to reach out and grab it. So then what happens is Skarsgård and his wife have to go into this room, and they are going to witness the end of the trial. And the end of the trial is he goes in, he's sitting in this weird kind of like almost Grecian amphitheater on these like stones, and he's looking down and he sees himself walk in, and then he's tied to a post, and we think, okay, is he gonna is this a firing squad? Well, he's in white, so he's this sacrificial victim, and there's like a circle cut out of his clothes where his belly is, and then the son of the farmer walks in, and he's given a ritual dagger. He walks up and he stabs him in the belly. Like, again, this is very Chaz Manson family style, stabs him in the belly a number of times, and then the double dies. Well, what's interesting is you look at Skarsgård and he's watching this happen and he's seeing, so what he's seeing here is he's seeing himself be executed, and the facial expression that he has, he starts to like a smile appears at the corner of his mouth. So we know that this has unleashed something. Um, because when the body is when the mind and the psyche and the soul leave the body, something else inhabits it, and then here something else literally has inhabited it. So is this a demon man watching the real guy get executed, or is this him and this was just his darker instinct? Well, okay, so what happens is after that, um, we cut to he goes out. Did my audio go out? Am I good? I should be good. Um, tell me if my audio is good. Give me a thumbs up or whatever. I think I should be good. Let me check. Mm, yeah, we should be good. I just cut it out for a second there to cough. So he goes back to hang out with, his buddies at the elite party, okay? And, um, and what's happened is, um, we see thank you, Jeff. We see Mia Goth and the French guy, and they say, "Hey, look, we're sorry about what happened, but now, like, you're on the other side, so come to this, party. We know this is gonna be an our child's, Eyes Wide Shut party." He goes into this, fancy condo. They're still at the resort, and they say, um, "What happened to you today has happened to all of us." They each went through some sort of, you know, sacrificial thing where they all committed some sort of thing, and now they are all here, and they learn that they're part of like they're kind of part of a club, real twisted club, where they can pretty much kind of do what they want. And they say, "Look, the way that it is on this island is people like us," they say, um, do these things and these things happen, but then on the other side of it, we learn that now we're free to be ourselves, and they have this sort of Al Crowley absolute freedom, where what that means is that they can dominate other people's lives, and they have the control, they have the high of the power of control over life and death, which is really a low, obviously. But so they say, the guy that was in charge of the investigation is at home tonight, so we're gonna pay him a visit, and they do this in a again, this is a very Chaz Manson, creepy crawly style. They get these masks, and the masks are twisted, hellish inferno versions of mangled faces, like, that are absolutely disgusting, and that is supposed to be, again, the outer representation of who they are on the inside. This is their spirit, right? And the one that Skarsgård has is a Lord of essentially a Lord of the Flies mask, right? He has got a Beelzebub, um, kind of, uh, pig mask with these weird pig horns, and they go up to the house, they break in, they see that the guy that was, the chief of police or whatever, he's doing some weird, his own weird eyes wide shutty things. They, pull him out of his bedroom. They, put him up, and then Mia Goth, like, holds the gun to the guy's head, and now they're gonna induct him into taking life, like, on purpose. So they do that, and then, of course, they get caught, and they all get caught together, and now they have to go through the whole rigmarole, again, where they have to meet with the Mengele character, and then they watch their doubles, get executed. But when we're watching it, our perspective is that they are now really being killed because the guy says, "Oh, we have to make an example of you." and so they, are put on blocks, and they all have their, sloats thrit, uh, total, I don't know, Enlightenment, French Revolution style, and then we see them laughing and having fun, up in the stands in the amphitheater. So now they've been, like, sort of inducted into this as a group. Well, um, as the, film goes on, um, the same thing sort of continuously happens until, um, we see Skarsgård is like they're at the house and they pull in somebody and Skarsgård. Oh, they introduced them to. I forgot about this. There is a yay, let's call it a yage ceremony where Mia Goth introduces him to some sort of ayahuasca drug, and he breathes it. He breathes in these dark fumes, and she says it's hallucinatory and an aphrodisiac. So then they do their sexing and they unite, and then they have to do another ritual where all the people come in, they humiliate their new victim, and he relieves himself on the person, and then like beats him, and then she takes off the mask and it's him. So now he's doing this to himself, and they didn't make the double like for that for the trial. They made it for the party. This kind of freaks him out, and he, like, runs away, and then the next part of the film is, like, they're humiliating him, they treat him like an animal, they tie a collar around his neck, they lead him in, like, a weird parade, like, in front of these cars. She humiliates him by telling him, "Look, I was gaslighting you the whole time, I never even read your book, you're pathetic." And then what happens at the end of the film is basically, like, they kind of wake up, and then now they're on their plane back home, and they're just talking like normal. "Oh, are we gonna do this again next year?" And Alexander Skarsgård stays at the resort, and they're all left, and he's there alone. So what does this mean? Well, um, I would say that this can be answered in a number of pretty simplistic ways according to what we've seen before and what we've been analyzing, which is number one, it's the same thing in J.G. Ballard's book. We see this is a most dangerous game where they're hunting other people. And Mia Goth is again this kind of Lilith character who is trying to show Skarsgård that the world that he's been involved with, like, that he's been the life that he's been living throughout has been a false creation, and now he has stepped through the other side, and he's in a world of absolute, liberty. He's crossed the abyss, and now he's in the hell world by choice because he loves it. He wants to be there by choice, where he has absolute liberation, but he is a total slave, right? And this is a stand-in for obviously what we see with the O'Brien things and the Most Dangerous Game and the Our Child parties and the Eyes Wide Shut, so that we have a blackmailing of people into a system that they cannot get out of, but that they want to be a part of, and that they have no morals and no values, and that even though sometimes it seems like Skarsgård is wrestling with himself, um, and what's right, he ultimately just continues to play a part in what he was doing before. And this is brought up at one of the parties that they have where one of the characters who's a playwright, they have like a playwright there, they have an architect. It's called Infinity Pool, by the way, because we learned that the architect, and that again, that's just like in Cocaine Nights where they're building the systems of totally enclosed and isolated islands, for the elite and their shenanigans, and this guy was building, a resort for, some conglomerate, somebody big, and he built an infinity pool, and it was where at the bar you could look up and see the people swimming. Now, this is weird because the water is like it's like they're looking upward through the abyss from hell, and remember in that again, that scene in Westworld season 2 where, Delio says They told you there were 2 fathers, one above, one below. They lied. It was only a devil looking back down at you. Totally Gnostic, right? And we learned that the infinity pool broke, so the glass was shattered, the mirror was shattered, and that the people in the bar were killed by the glass. And this is again, this is like the book that I've been working on, because the Mirror Man wears a mask of his own face, and he has eyes. He has mirror shards for eyes, and his weapon is a mirror shard, so that you have a sort of endlessly recurring, um, eternal return of the labyrinthine mind of the killer who can't get back to who he was at the beginning because he's been put through the ultra rituals, as if that makes sense. So, so the playwright who, or sorry, the architect who designed that, and the playwright who's there, both say it's interesting because JD just covered The Lives of Others, which is a great film, and The Lives of Others concerns the East German playwright. Anyway, the playwright says, one thing to put to you: do you ever think about whether you are you, or were you the man in the box? Right? I'm a man in the box. Are you the Shouts out to, Countess out there if she sees this, right? Man in the box, Alice in Chains. Um, were you the man in the box, or are you you? And in a way, it's irrelevant because in this sense that, um, no matter what, he has been put through the ritual, and that it's still his body who's being inhabited by this clone, um, demon that has been organized by the Mangala figure in the kind of trauma bonding situation that they have in the setup of the narrative. And notice that, by the way, in the film, the Mangala figure, uh, never faces any, like, he's in charge of the whole thing. So of course he's like the demiurge figure who is running this whole program system for the elites to do their thing, and for his Lilith to induct the Skarsgård figure into their little society. Um, just want to look at this one analysis of the film that says this is by, Louis Pavlikos, for Complex Canada. Brandon Cronenberg on tackling the ultra rich resort with a morbid twist in Infinity Pool. My notes say Greek tragedian mass again, kind of Indonesian death mass, and the mask, Eyes Wide Shut, the Our Child parties, and it's also a take on Kalinka, because this is what happens also in the movie Glass Onion that just came out, which I couldn't watch. I couldn't watch it because in the first 5 minutes, we have the various, different, like, branches of all the pyramid people who are, like, quirky and sitting around, and, "Oh, we've got, the Jonathan Lennon Glass Onion, and we're all gonna go, and we're gonna solve a murder mystery," and they're all in an oubliette box, and then when, Caniel Drag shows up at the island of the elites, of course, he is wearing his, MASQUE, and I had enough in the first 5 minutes. But it's interesting because this is kind of a darker version of the same thing in the first 5 minutes of that movie. It says, "When dealing with writer's block, sometimes the best antidote is simply to pack up and go on a trip, preferably somewhere new with cultures that clash with those from back home." In Infinity Pool, directed by Canadian filmmaker Brandon Cronenberg, James Foster, Alexander Skarsgård, and his wife M, uh, yes, who's played by Cleopatra Coleman, take a holiday to a resort in a fictional country to help Foster find inspiration to write his new book. While the resort doesn't seem like it can lead to new discoveries, they meet Gabby and Alban. Gabby's interesting because I took that as a kind of GAVI, or an inversion of Gab, like Gabe, like Gabriel, because she's like this dark, evil, fallen angel, or Gab, like she's talking. right? She talks him into it, she gaslights him. And then Albin, who is like an inversion of St. Albin, who offered to take them away from the resort against its warnings for the day to enjoy the country scenery. However, on the way back to the hotel, everything changes from Foster when a tragic accident lands him in prison and forces him to make a decision, accept his own execution or pay for the creation of his clone and watch it get executed instead. Infinity Pool walks the line between a hedonistic bloodbath and a playful satire about identity, the ultra rich, and consequences that go unpunished. Playful satire? Mm, no. I disagree. Um, that is like in American Psycho when they go to Texarkana, a tasty but playful little dish, right? Will you be having the charcoal arugula? I'll have a J and B straight and a Corona, right? Ooh. Um, In Complex, Canadia's conversation with Cronenberg, the director touches on what inspired him to write the movie, how certain scenes came to be, and how he came to characterize James Foster in so many different layers. Okay, so is Foster supposed to be like E.M. Forster? I mean, look, I think that this is interesting because this is why I don't. I like to look at the work itself or at the text itself if we're reading the book. Um, at the work itself, because oftentimes the the words or the commentary of the filmmaker or the artist or the writer will not um, accurately show what we have witnessed in terms of the artwork. Either they're playing it down or they themselves have no real understanding of the thing that they've created in terms of a commentary on it. The work speaks is supposed to speak for itself. Again, this is like asking T.S. Eliot, what does the wasteland mean? What are the first what's the opening of the wasteland mean, T.S. Eliot? And he would say, April is the cruelest month, breeding lilacs out of the dead land, mixing memory and desire, stirring dull roots with spring rain. In other words, the work speaks for itself. Now, of course, they have a publicity tour and they have to, you know, give these interviews, but let's just look at what he has to say just for some context and use our discernment to delineate between the work and what he says about it. He says it started as a short story, actually. This is how the movie came together. That was just essentially the first scene. So I was just interested in identity and punishment in a scene where someone is watching an exact likeness of themselves be executed who believes that he's guilty. It eventually expanded out to include the resort elements and the setting. So I was turning it into a feature script. That's really low core, right? The ideas about watching somebody who believes that he's guilty, well, that's much more complex than that in the film itself, right? Because the question is whether he believes he's actually guilty or not. I mean, he's guilty in the sense that he has done this, right? He feels the ultimate guilt, which is the more important guilt. But then again, his guilt gets wiped away pretty instantaneously afterwards, and he's also kind of rebelling against the fact that it was an accident because he's put up to it and because the people in his little, death circle or whatever um snitch on him and they make up a story about the stealing of the car and all this stuff. He says, let's see, James Foster isn't quite part of the rich people crowd, having married into money. What separates him besides that from the rest of the characters? Okay, he says there is that sort of insecurity, that kind of desperation to be not just one of them, but to be seen on many levels as someone who wants to be rather than someone he is. It's not just the money, although there is that, but he's someone who wants to see himself as a writer, and he is maybe aging out of it. You know, he is maybe reaching the point in his life where it's becoming clear that he's not going to be that person or isn't that person, and that leaves him vulnerable to these people who are stroking his ego. So I think that desperation, that slight outsider status is what ropes him into that group, but also makes it harder for him to fully embrace them without really I don't wanna spoil too much. Well, sorry, but, like, that is all again, like, maybe that plays a part in his characterization or his actor notes, but that doesn't play a part in terms of the deeper analysis of the film. Yes, he is an outsider in that, number 1, he is, I is an other. He feels outside of himself, and then that gets personified because he is literally outside of himself, because he sees himself. This is great for explaining the doppelganger because the question is not whether, like, they've made a clone of him. The question is whether he is him. whether the guy that he sees is actually himself and which one is he. This kind of plays a role in, remember Jordan Peele's Us? This plays a role in that, with other ultra elements that occur in the film. But I think that it goes deeper than that in the sense that, it's not just that he wants to be part of some group or that he wants to be a writer. That's like very surface level. The deeper level of this is who he wants to be in terms of his spirit, who he wants to be, like, what does he represent? What's his worldview, and what does he want out of life? Well, ultimately, he wants death and domination, right? He wants absolute liberty to be a part of this thing that dominates, right? Um, yeah, Christopher says that almost sounds like autobiography in a sense, doesn't it? Maybe it does. I mean, because of course, all work like this is, of course, autobiographical in a sense. It has to be. You're a person writing it. Um, the question is like, what does it bring out about your deeper self? And also, what are these guys into that make the film? Hmm. He says, the interviewer says, what made James Foster think that the resort would be the ideal spot to find inspiration? Stupid question. I'm sorry. Um, He answers, "I guess a kind of pathetic decision. It's about the fact he's going to this country. It's obviously an interesting country. It's a fictional country. You can imagine it seemingly inspiring, but then to go there and go to a resort and only be exploring the tacky Disneyland version of that country, of that culture, and that history was maybe a pathetic element of the character and a bit of a joke, and about how resorts deal with culture in the host state." Well, that's probably true. Anybody who's been to a foreign country or on a cruise or, you know, um, anything like that, it's like, well, not a foreign country, but a foreign country in terms of going to a place outside of your own country where you are on a resort, okay? Um, and again, that's what the beach deals with is, getting off the beaten path. I actually went to the place where they filmed, the beach, which was Phuket. They filmed it in Phuket and Koh Phi Phi in Thailand. And, it is interesting how even though I went in 2005, and the beach was filmed in, like, 2000, I went there 6 months after the, tsunami, and what was interesting is that, the tsunami had happened and everything was destroyed and everything was wiped out, but then I went there 6 months later and it was, like, completely rebuilt. It was like it never even happened. And I think that speaks to obviously it speaks to the corporate elements that are involved in rebuilding and how strong tourism is. But by the way, I gotta say, um, of all the places that I've been, that place was by far the worst. I went there because I was living in Malaysia for a summer and I had a weekend free. And so my friend and my friend, he's cool. He does, I won't say his name, but he does, he does voiceover work. He did like voiceover work for like Cartoon Network and stuff. He's a writer now, but we were both actors. And anyway, um, and he spoke Mandarin. He's American, but his grandparents are Chinese. Anyway, he spoke Mandarin, so I was able to get around with him because he was bilingual. Anyway, so we decided to go because we found, like, a flight for, like, $1 to, Phuket. We decided not to go to Bangkok. We wanted to go to Phuket because it was beach, and, um, and we went there, and I gotta say, like, I'm sure people I mean, we took a different route, like, we didn't go to the resort, and we didn't do all that stuff. I'm sure that's fine or whatever. But we went, on our own. The It's interesting because the flight that we took was this was 2005, and then after I got back, I was reading an American newspaper, and that particular, airline was banned by, W, as part of a bunch of the airlines that were supposedly involved in the things that were happening, post Big 9. I mean, the plane had, like, chickens on it. It was weird, but it cost $1. Anyway, and our hotel room cost $1 a night or something. It was ridiculous, and so we kinda went, we were just hanging around in the town or whatever, but it was awful. It was like it was I mean, it was hellish. And it was just like it was just weird for all the reasons that you can imagine, the things that you see, like walking around the town. We were only there for 2 days, and it was just like, whatever. And then we got back on the plane and went back home, well, to Malaysia. I also went to Singapore. Singapore is amazing because Singapore, we took a 3-hour bus ride down from KL down to Singapore at the tip of the Malay Peninsula, right? Because Singapore is basically like Malaysia, right? You got the Malacca Straits, and then you go down to the tip, and then we went into Singapore, and I stayed for like maybe 3 days or something. I went with some friends there, and Singapore is amazing because there was this point where we were on the, subway in Singapore, and it's like it was even back then, it was totally futuristic. Like, you get on, and it has, like, these glass doors, and then you walk inside, and it's totally clean. And I remember that one of my friends gave me a piece of gum, and I was chewing gum, and everyone on the subway looked at me. And then I asked, some expat was sitting next to me on the subway, and I asked, like, "What's the deal? Why is everybody looking at me?" And he was like, "Gum is strictly illegal here. Do not chew gum. Like, either swallow the gum or spit it out in a Kleenex or something and throw it away." So I did. And then you notice when you go out onto the street in Singapore that, like, when you're walking in New York, and you look at the sidewalks, because we had come from New York, I was living in New York, but, when you look at the sidewalks in New York, you see, like, the little stains of what look like gum on the sidewalk. But, but in Singapore, the sidewalks are, like, gleaming white. There is no trash. There is no there's no rubbish. And then I recalled when I was there the story about, do you remember in the '90s when that kid who was the son of, like, the ambassador or something was arrested, and he appealed to Bubba to get him free because he was gonna be, lashed, right? You remember that was the punishment? And everybody here was like, "Oh, how barbaric, they're gonna do the lash and stuff. They're gonna, it was the caning, they were gonna cane him." Well, what I learned when I was there was that, we knew this guy named Bobby who was a Malay, and he was a bartender, and he said that, um, that's not what you think it is. The cane isn't what you think it is. The cane is a traditional punishment called a rotan, and basically what it is they get this guy who looks like a sumo, he's the official caner, and the kid, I remember, had gotten, like, 3 his punishment was, like, 3 strokes of the cane. Well, the rotan is like a big bamboo pole, and when the guy hits you with it, it would break your rib cage, and it takes, like, a year to recover. So 3 strokes means, like, it's over 3 years, and that is one of the punishments for things like, whatever this guy I think he had done graffiti or something in Singapore. Singapore is amazing because it is it's like it's like future world, lots of money, very prosperous, but it's like, it has, like, this clear, like, really weird juxtaposition between the there's a clear contrast between the Malay architecture and the British influence. Remember Churchill in his defense of Singapore? And the futurism, and then that really is, like, synthesized in Hong Kong. I went to Hong Kong for a weekend, and Hong Kong is, like, one of the coolest cities I've ever seen. I mean, it was like it had all the best parts of New York, but it was British. And this was post handover. The guy who it was interesting because the guy, the what was his name? Patton, Chris Patton, maybe he was the. I remember when the handover happened because I read about it in the newspaper. I read it before school when I was in school in the '90s. And the lease ran up, and then they did the handover. And Patton he was an Ulsterman. I think he was a Queens where I went. But anyway, Hong Kong was wild because, like, Hong Kong Island, most of this is my take. Most of Hong Kong Island is like I you see the city of Hong Kong, and that's not most of the island. That's like a small part of the island. Most of Hong Kong, when you see in the movies and stuff, is Kowloon, and Kowloon is the continent. So Hong Kong is like Kowloon, and then there's the bay. Is it or the harbor? Is it Victoria Harbor where you take the sampans and the boats across, and then you have Hong Kong. And Hong Kong is weird because it's like Blade Runner Future World. There's a like this praying man, this building that looks like it's against feng shui or whatever because it like breaks it. And the people are freaked out because the lines are like unfeng shuied or whatever. And it's like a praying mantis building. There's like a gold building, there's a neon building. And I had a friend from drama school who grew up in Hong Kong, and lived up near the peak. But you go to Kowloon, and Kowloon is like Blade Runner mirror neon future city, and it never sleeps. It's I haven't been to Tokyo, but it's I imagine that it's what like, Harajuku or something looks like. But 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 Hong Kong is also cool because it's like they had the old British taxis that are, the red taxis, and they had the old colonial buildings right up against the future buildings. So it was really wild, when I went. So anyway, what was sorry for that little train. I don't know what I was saying. Oh, because he was saying, um, oh, there's something else in this paragraph. He says, when he said, you can imagine it's seemingly inspiring, but then you go there and you go to a resort and only be exploring the tacky Disneyland version of the story. I mean, I've been to resorts and places like I've stayed at resorts in Cancun and stuff, in the Bahamas, but I always went to these other places either by myself or with one friend, usually by myself. I went to Hong Kong by myself. I went to Singapore with a couple of friends I was working with, when I was acting, and then I went to Thailand with my buddy, that I was with in Malaysia, that I just described. And then Europe was mostly almost solely, when I went to the continent and I went around was by myself. And, I met up with people that I knew, but I was traveling alone. And the thing he says about exploring tacky Disneyland is interesting because I remember that when I moved to New York, it was, post Giuliani, and it was a clear contrast between the way people described, for instance, Times Square versus the way that Times Square was in the 2000s. Now, of course, especially 2 or 3 years ago, it was like Mad Max world, but in a Cormac McCarthy The Road, version where we have like armed gangs of marauders, four-wheeling on streets, and you have the massive, fentanyl the fentanyl, glass-eyed people and all that stuff that happens. Now, that wasn't in 2004 and 5, but, like, Times Square was very Disney-fied. They had the Disney store in Times Square, so it was interesting, in the sense that, like, it wasn't the seedy Times Square that you saw in the movies in the '80s where everybody was terrified of going to New York versus the contrast between that and and the Patrick Bateman world of '80s New York, right? Where you have, like, this clear line between the 2. Now, then and maybe now, I don't know about Times Square now, but it's like, you had Disney World, but in Times Square. I worked right off of Herald Square, right by Macy's. I was, a bartender and a bar back at a famous steakhouse off of Herald Square in New York, and that was fun. But anyway, when I think of what he says right here about Disneyland, it brings to mind that you guys should, check out if you have a minute, look up, probably won't put a link in here, but look up Banksy's Dismal Land because a few years ago he made a version of I think it was in Weston Supermare, of he made a kind of weird, surreal Banksy version of Disneyland called Dismal Land, where, like, you have to watch the video. It's pretty it's like a three-dimensional multimedia art project that's supposed to be a satire of, corp corporatism and corporate domination and capitalism and, where everything is, like, the tour guides at the place are, like, either, like, students or local ravers or emo people that are you ask them for directions, and they're like, "I don't know, mate. Go over to the docks." And, I appreciated that because Banksy is from Bristol, and that's where I went to drama school. Anyway, But that reminded me of Dismaland because the movie kind of is a is a is an even more hellish world of Dismaland, but where the people this is their Disneyland. Remember in Apocalypse Now, Disneyland? It's here. It really is here. Remember that with Lance the Surfer? It says, "What inspired the Chinese restaurant scene in the movie?" There's a scene in a Chinese restaurant where what's weird is that the locals, all have these 2 kind of teardrop tattoos by their eye. So we have, of course, left eye symbolism in the film, and we have the kind of teardrop where it's supposed to be that they are marked out from the other people and also that they are somehow aware of the, feud system, not a feudal system, but a feud system, that exists in their society, where they live by a kind of, an Icelandic blood feud in a weird alternate version of a weird, it's like an Indo-European fictional, Our Child, Eyes Wide Shut party, compound resort. And it says, "Once in my life," Cronenberg said, "Once in my life, I went to a traditional all-inclusive resort, and that Chinese restaurant was actually directly from that resort." He also said that when he was a teenager, he went to a resort in, the Dominican Republic, which a lot of people here, at lea in America do when they are I mean, I know people that went, like, when they were on spring break, when they were, like, seniors in high school, when they were in college, and they would go to Dominican Republic. I went to Cancun, but this says, he went there and then he noticed that they were in a compound and he noticed the contrast between, like, the way that the local population lived and the way that they lived on the resort. Of course, that still occurs in places like Cancun and stuff where, of course, the certain groups, are incentivized to continue the tourism industry, and to leave it unabated so that they can continue their operations. But, you also see it in, like, Hawaii. I mean, I haven't been to Hawaii, but I know that, people that I know that have been to Hawaii, that's one of the first things that they you may put that in the comments if you've been to Hawaii and you noticed that when you went there, the weird stark contrast between the resort, right? The resort, the all expenses paid resort land with the kind of pure nature versus the weird interior with the crystal meth villages and stuff. I don't know. Tell me if you've noticed that. Um, he says that's reality. It was a group of dudes dressed in these sort of offensive Chinese man Halloween costumes with the braid and everything. The Q is what you call it, and everything. So yeah, that was taken directly out of reality. In other words, they are putting on a play acting show of what the local culture is like, but it becomes offensive to him um because it is merely for the entertainment of the people watching, like for 2 seconds. With I guess, no appreciation for what the culture is. But then what happens in the film is they that the culture show that's put on for them is what they then inhabit. So they become part of the culture, um, in a way that they are completely submerged into it, but then they supersede it. Um, I've been to Hawaii and BLA hasn't. I'm out of reality too. The time seemed to be indicative of resort culture in a broader sense. First of all, it was completely anachronistic and said a lot about the politics of resort life, but also stood in a sort of disturbingly tidy way for that process of taking the world and reducing it to this kind of Disneyland alternate dimension version of reality. It says, there's been a trend of movies these days that have been critical of the ultra rich and their lifestyles. Critical? I don't think that that's the appropriate term. Maybe revelatory. How did you sidestep some of the cliches that these movies sometimes face? I mean, it's just funny. I know a bunch of these films have sort of hit it at the same time. I think the process for getting Infinity Pool to this point, maybe it was 5 or 6 years. Plus, I was writing the short story as far back as 2014, at least maybe earlier. So it's just a coincidence, a coincidence. I wasn't really responding to those films given the pace of film development. Maybe not, but the way this stuff all works, right? I don't want to. Of course, culture creation plays a major role in this. He's not going to mention that. I want to say narrow, but they're more particularly interested in that subject. Hopefully, Infinity Pool will feel different enough because it's looking at a broader range of things. Then there's a question about the acting, which I just like scratched out. Who cares? What was the most challenging part about making Infinity Pool? We were just doing quite a bit in not a lot of time. I think that's it. It was just a normal independent film challenge. They were shooting in 2 separate locations. Both of those other films were in and around Toronto. Okay, so I was right about Toronto. Um, and how they filmed, what's it called? Possessor in Toronto, but also he filmed it, like, on the coast of Croatia. Um, and that's about all I got from that article. There's another article here from IndieWire about, Cronenberg on vacation, Dominican Republic. He says, in this fictional Eastern European country, outsider it's not really Eastern European. There are Eastern European elements of it, but it's sort of Eastern European and then mid and then and East Asian, which functions as a kind of global conglomeration in terms of where they go, right? Which is a stand-in for what they want. He says outsiders who commit crimes are cloned and forced to watch their doppelgangers get executed, which Skarsgård's character likes so much that it turns into his KINK. Gross. The movie abounds with freaky stuff and bizarre body double antics to weird and wild to spoil. Too weird. Too they spell two wrong. Too weird and wild to spoil here, but it's just as fun to explore what it all means. He talks about Disneyland as a mirror of reality, but it becomes weird and grotesque. Um, as for the clones, there's an undeniable indictment of modern day narcissism baked into the conceit that Cronenberg won't deny. That element of constant self observation is something I was thinking about. That's a big part of our society now. Well, I mean, that's true. He added he was less fearful of technology than the way people choose to use it. Here's what Cronenberg says. I don't think technology is inherently good or bad. Okay. All right. It's always used in both ways. To me, the scariest part about social media is the degree to which people can be influenced and open themselves up emotionally and psychologically to be hackable, and how that intersects with issues like free speech and democracy. Okay, well, the last part, whatever. But in terms of hackable consciousness and the lural nink, let's call it that, body hacking, mind hacking, and then also the narcissistic elements, which he doesn't really talk about in the sense that it occurs in the film. I mean, it does occur, but on a surface level. It's actually, of course, it's much deeper than that, mixed in with Most Dangerous Game and um, a, uh, a kind of anti-baptism that occurs, where the again the character is baptized into a death world where it's like he's baptized into hell and he wants to be there. He finds that he loves it. However, audiences choose to interpret it. Infinity Pool certainly brings the subversive goods from a close up, nasty thing that occurs in the unrated cut to Skarsgård, barking like an animal, and a whole lot more. Um, but you see that, we see that. That's the way that it's going, right? That's become massive. So this is just it's kind of reflects the way that I mean, it's interesting that he mentioned social media. Of course, that's one level, and that's a massive level. But the way that people feel free to indulge their nastiness, and it's promoted. Uh, and he held back on submitting Infinity Pool to Cannes to make room for his father's latest film. His father's latest film, um, which I probably JD will do an analysis on that maybe, which is the latest David Cronenberg film, which is a film with, what's the latest David Cronenberg film called? Jethro, help me out here. What's it called? It's got Viggo Mortensen and what's her face as a Marinka character, where he's a performance artist who's engaged in body horror for the public in the domain of the big corporate interests, and again features ego death and subversion. Um, Also, I mentioned, the last quote in this, they quoted David Cronenberg, and David Cronenberg said, "To be shooting at the same time is delicious for a father. I was really very proud." What a weird Crimes of the Future. Thank you, Andrew. Yes, thank you, Jethro. Um, which is a creepy way of describing anything, right? And also that ties in with some dialogue in the film because when he first meets the group after he's gone over to the other side and he meets the other group of people, um, one of the characters says something about, "Oh, you're here with the flesh eaters." And it's like, "Oh, it's a joke." But it's not. That's again, that's one of the major themes that we see. And I was surprised that that didn't occur in the film. That kind of occurs, um, like, it sort of occurs in the movie The Menu, like, through metaphor. But of course, the menu is again the movie The Menu, right, with Ray Fiennes that came out that JD covered, is a group of the various members of elites on a private island who are there for this sort of ritual. And at one point, that a guy is sacrificed in the movie, or MK Omega's himself in the movie, and you're supposed to assume that like what they are eating is that, if that makes sense. So, man, so that is, the 2 Brandon Cronenberg films, Possessor and, Infinity Pool. I hope you guys, appreciated appreciated that, analysis. Leave me some, I don't wanna say liked, but liked my analysis, not like the films or whatever. And again, you've either seen the movies or you're gonna go watch them, or you're definitely not gonna watch them. But I watched them for you. And, again, that ties in with our, JG Ballard analysis that we did back in November, so you can revisit that. Coming up, we've got we've got The Age Letters, William S. Burroughs' The Age Letters, which we did as a sponsored stream. I'm doing that with Jerry, Exposing Powerful Lies. He's coming over here on Sunday night, and, we're gonna talk about thank you, Toledo out there for that 10 Kiwi bucks. She says, "Keep up the good work, BLA." Thank you so much. Really appreciate that. You still have time, people, if you want to support me directly through Venmo, Cash, PayPal, or drop a super chat. Any of those ways really supports me. I really could use it. I need to get a whole new stack of books. I've been through our whole stack for January. The only books that I have yet to cover for my January list are mid-January into mid-February are, F. Paul Wilson's The Keep, which we'll be doing soon. That is a Michael Mann film, so we'll be doing the book and the film analysis. And then, another Cormac McCarthy, which is The Crossing. So I gotta tear through those books and read those. Also, we'll be doing our Wes Anderson film, sponsor stream coming up. We'll be doing another film lyrics music lyrics sponsor stream coming up. Um, we've got a bunch of 'em. I gotta look at the list, but we got a bunch of sponsor streams coming up. If you want to sponsor a stream, please drop me $100 and I'll cover that. I put, I think, a pretty considerable amount of time and work into this, which I do for fun anyway. But give me some ideas and things you want me to cover. Um, you can also email me at madmaximalism with two X's at gmail.com. I also decided, because we've been doing a lot of modern literature and we haven't covered it, we might as well cover Hemingway. So I'll be doing A Farewell to Arms and In Our Time, and probably talking about The Sun Also Rises and A Movable Feast as part of that. And then, yeah, again, with Jerry, we have The Age Letters and Ted Morgan's Literary Outlaw, and then Word Virus or Word v Word, by William S. Burroughs. That's a book title by William S. Burroughs. And Sammy sends 449 449 quid, says send $100 on PayPal. Hopefully came through. We'll send an email tomorrow. Thank you so much. Appreciate you, Sammy. Let's look at that. Let's see. Thank you so much, Sammy. Yes, I hope that came through too. Did you just send it? Let me look at the list. Yes, you did. I just got oh, wait. Yes, and just popped up. Yes, thank you, Sammy, for that $100 sponsored stream donation. Really appreciate you, homeboy. Yes, send me an email, madmaximalism2x's at gmail.com, and give me some ideas for what to cover. I'll definitely check that out. Thank you so much, Sammy. That really means a lot to me. I really appreciate it. I definitely can use that to survive. To survive. Remember he says that Tropic Thunder? Survive. Also, thank you to Nicholas who sends $5 on PayPal. Thank you again to Amy who sent $10 on PayPal. Jason, $10 on PayPal. Thank you again to Jason. Thank you to again to our homeboy Technoir Graphics, Mixkey, who sent $30 Cash App. Thank you to the real John Connor who sent $15 Cash App. Thank you to that was a couple days ago. Thank you to Thomas Totten who sent $5 in the last stream. Thank you to Amptown, all of the sponsored streams, all of the super chats. Really appreciate you. Um, again, just to mention, I'll be coming up on Monday night. We got a good one on Monday night because we're going to have our homeboy BPF, Andy from the Crucible, who's going to be here. And we're going to be covering. Hold on. Sorry. Somebody blowing me up here. All right, that's the homeboys. All right, so yeah, so Monday night we're going to be covering Ender's Game. This one will be interesting because I asked, well, actually, I put it out there, and then Andy said he would help me out with it, and so that's great. So I asked him um, since he wanted to do it, and I asked him for input on this because he knows the work well, and that will help us out a lot because we've covered a pretty wide range of works here, but yes, taking longer because from the UK. Yes, absolutely, that's why. Because here in America, it takes a minute to pop through, so thank you so much, Sammy. Because, we've only cut as far as sci-fi is concerned, I mean, we've only covered really what? We did Snow Crash by Neil Stephenson, but we haven't really done any other, sci-fi works per se that I can think of. We've covered all the other we've covered a wide range of literature here. And again, we've got our 1 year anniversary coming up. I think that's like February 21st. So maybe on February 21st, we'll try to do a big party stream or, something and a review of the year. If you guys want that, that'll be fun. We've covered lots of Cormac McCarthy, lots of Bret Easton Ellis. We've done a bunch of postmodern works. We've done modernist works, Victorian novels. We've done romantic poetry, Elizabethan poetry, Jacobean. We've done Elizabethan drama. We've done Shakespeare. We've done American romanticism. We've done Gothic horror. We've done modernist poems with T.S. Eliot. We've done contemporary poetry with Yusef Kuminyaka. We did modern poetry with Dylan Thomas. We've done a lot of stuff. So, but we got to keep rolling here, y'all. We got to keep grinding. Some of the works that I have in mind coming up, which you can help me with by super chatting and helping to get books after I get some McD's to eat or something. Will be we're gonna do Kyrie Mora by Thomas Harris, the author of uh Silence of the Lambs, and maybe we'll do a Manhunter a Manhunter analysis, but we're gonna do Kyrie Mora. We've got I don't know, there's a whole bunch of stuff in the works that we need to cover. Let me know if you wanna see any more film analysis. If you want me to do we haven't done much many music lyrics recently. Of course, we covered Zeppelin and Britpop and some of those things just for fun, so we'll be doing more of those soon because we had a sponsor stream. Also, if you want, anybody to come on the show or you want me to go, on anybody else, then, let them know. So, because we're gonna, hopefully we're gonna keep going on our homeboy, Church of the Eternal Logo channel. We love going over there. We just did our Terminator 2 analysis the other day. We just, went we were all there, so I say we. I was on, Rachel Wilson, Based Homeschool Mom's channel, her new channel at Rachel Wilson on YouTube, with Jerry exposing powerful lies. We did, Team America. That was fun. We gotta have her back. she was on the show early on, right? Remember? Because we did The Crucible. She's a great friend of mine and a great friend of the show. So, of course, we went on JD. We went on there to cover Wizard of Oz. We went on Beautiful Tristana to cover Dostoevsky. So if you want me to go on anybody's show, let them know. We're gonna keep grinding and keep covering books and analysis and just keep it all going. So thank y'all for being here. Really appreciate you. I'll be back probably tomorrow with I might cover this book. I haven't decided if I'm gonna cover this book or not because we've done Graham Greene. We did The Quiet American, and I tore through Graham Greene's The Power and the Glory last night when Cotezie and BPF were streaming. Listening to them and just reading this Graham Greene book. I haven't decided if I want to cover that or not. And then we're going to do our Hemingway. And then I got to read the Age Letters again for the third time to do that for our Jerry stream on Sunday. So maybe back tomorrow. But again, thank you for the support. Let me check one more time. And I think I got in all the super chats. Let me look over here and just make sure. You guys, let's refresh that. Yes. So we got Sammy. Thank you to Sammy. Thank you to Toledo. Thank you to Elias for that $20 super chat. Thank you to Andrew Turner, um, who said, yeah, he's going to skip Infinity Pool. Okay. Don't blame you. Thank you to Joseph again about Rene Girard and to Amptown, who's always supporting us. So, and to Mixkey, of course. We got Mixkey who supported us. Thank you so much over at Technor Graphics. And really, y'all, that's about all I got. So thank you so much. Share the stream. Make sure you like it. Leave some comments. Drop me an email. And I'll see y'all later. Stay warm out there, y'all. Stay warm and keep LIVIN. All right. All right, y'all. Peace. Love y'all. Peace.